Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today we're going to start with the northern front lines. Today we're going to start with the Kupiansk and with Liman front lines because the most interesting and the most important updates are coming from this bridgehead. First of all, let's start with the Novoselivka, with this area. As you remember, this morning we discussed the situation in this area and we reported that the Russian military expert Ryba reported that the Russians managed to launch another wave of offensive operation in this area, trying to maintain their bridgehead in the vicinity of the forest lines between Stelimakhovka and Kuzyomovka. We are talking about these forest lines that goes like strictly from Stelimakhovka to Kuzyomovka, these lines. And as a result of those attacks, probably those attacks took place not today but yesterday. As a result of those attacks, the Russians managed to develop their bridgehead on the south of Novoselivka. Later today, somewhere at noontime, we got another confirmation that the Russians launched offensive operation in the direction of Novoselivka from the south, and the sources on the ground from this territory published the geolocated video of destroyed Ukrainian armored vehicle that were running somewhere in the vicinity of those lines, and the Russians basically attacked Novoselivka from the south, and as a result of that attack, the Russians entered that settlement. And somewhere at 8 p.m., 8 p.m. of the local time, the Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings, the Ukrainians were forced to step back from this settlement completely, and basically the Ukrainians started their movements to the north using the road N26, and they were moving in direction, some forces were moving in direction of Berestove, and another part of Ukrainian forces were moving further to the Krakhmalne. So basically the Russians have established control over Novoselivka, and now the Russians have everything they need to continue advancing. And of course, according to my understanding of the situation, the next target that the Russians are planning to attack is Stelimakhovka, this settlement, because the Ukrainians didn't have time to prepare fortifications in the air, in the fields, normal fortifications on strongholds in the air between Stelimakhovka and the road N26, because this territory was under complete fire control. The main Ukrainian fortifications are located on the western side of Zhiribets River in this area, so for now the Russians do have possibilities to attack and to start after that, to start movements from the north to the south in this direction, in direction of Mesazharevka, in direction of Andreevka, and in the global scope in direction of Novoyegorovka and Karamzinovka. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. Also, very interesting updates are coming from Kupiansk itself. The Russians continue bombing and shelling this settlement, trying to attack the Ukrainians' ammo depots, warehouses, accumulation of Ukrainian forces. The Russians doing everything they have with artillery, with drones, just to slow down and not to allow the Ukrainians to make a complete normal rotation and supplying and supporting of their forces on the line between Kislevka, Kotlarovka, Novoselivka. And the Russians published the video of results of one of those attacks. Basically on this video we see that the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian position and Ukrainian ammo depot somewhere in the forest, and also armored vehicle in the forest of Kupiansk. And after artillery strike, the Ukrainians lost ammo as well as ammo depot and the armored vehicle that the Ukrainians were trying to hide in that forest. So this is the situation about Kupiansk. The Russians managed to advance, and I believe that they will make a small regrouping, and after that they will continue pushing the Ukrainians in this bridgehead. And this is a very smart and perfect attack, and we need to understand one thing, that there is a very high chances that this is not the real attempts or the real beginning from the Russian side of, let's say, greatest Russian counter-offensive operation. At least the Russians have 2 plans, the minimum plan and the maximum plan. Of course, the maximum plan is to collapse the entire front line and to push the Ukrainians to step back from the eastern side of Oskol River to the western side of that river. And when talking about Oskol River, this is the river. So basically the Russians need to establish the front line along this river. It's the maximum, the maximum goal, the maximum achievements that the Russians can just imagine about that offensive operation. The minimal objectives of the Russians is to force the Ukrainians to take their reserves from South Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia area and to redeploy these reserves to the north in direction of Kharkiv. And of course, this is the minimal goal, just to reduce the pressure of the Ukrainian forces on the south. So both these two goals is normal for the Russians, and if they are able to achieve one of those goals, that means that they won during this tactical operation on the Kupiansk front line. Now we are moving to the Karamzinovka, to this area. We haven't received any updates from this bridgehead. Just the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that they managed to repel Ukrainian attacks on this bridgehead without any video and photo confirmations. And now we are moving to Liman front line, and today we got a lot of very interesting updates. And also somewhere at 7-8 p.m. of the local time, one correction, at 3 p.m. of the local time, the Russians reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to penetrate another Ukrainian defense belt and to get as close as possible to Yampolovka. This is the settlement Yampolovka. So basically, according to that map that was provided by the Russian forces on the ground on this territory, the Russians, as a result of attack, managed to establish control over this bridgehead, over this sector of Ukrainian territory on Liman front line. So as you can see, the progress is very big, and if that piece of information was correct, that means that the Russians entered the forest in front of Yampolovka, and the Russians managed to establish fire control over the road that goes from Mirne to Yampolovka. Anyway, by all these attacks and developments, the Russians increased their presence in this area, and they established fire and artillery control over the supply roads that Ukrainians were using to send reinforcements, reserves, and any type of supply to the Ukrainian forces in Crimea and to Ukrainian forces on the line Ternoye-Nevska. And currently their possibilities have been reduced by the Russians' attacks. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, as a result of Russian artillery strikes, as a result of strikes of Russian air forces and Russian storming troopers, the Ukrainians lost 90 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems, 1 Akatsa and another D-30 howitzer. Furthermore, the Ukrainians made their own counter-offensive operations, and mainly the Ukrainians were trying to develop and to attack in direction of Chervonopopovka, trying to reduce the Russian pressure in this salient and trying to force the Russians to send their reserves back from this bridgehead, let's say, to Chervonopopovka for stabilizing the situation. But that Ukrainian attack got onto the Russian defense belt, and the Ukrainians were completely defeated, and after a few waves of attack, the Ukrainians were forced to step back from this area towards their positions Novoselivka and Nevska. Of course, we understand that the Ukrainians, I believe, they didn't plan to make a significant penetration and capturing of Chervonopopovka. There was a real, not even recon combat, that was something like force in combat, where the Ukrainians were trying just to stretch the Russian forces, to slow down them, to pin them down, and not to allow them to develop the bridgehead in such a big speed that the Russians are doing right now. Furthermore, the Russians continue pushing the Ukrainians in Crimea forest. So as you can see, this is a real broad frontline attack, and Crimea forest, of course, is the most difficult part of the combat line, of the front line in this area, because the forest, a very big forest. The Russians published the video of another episode of storming the trenches, when the Russian stormtroopers were dropping grenades inside of Ukrainian trenches and strongholds, and after a few attempts, the Russians managed to capture this small bridgehead in the forest under support and under support of Russian artillery and tanks and so on. So the clashes there are very heavy, and also the Russians reported that these days there are a very big number of Ukrainian soldiers who took a decision to surrender. Of course, we understand that also there's a very high chances that the Russians also tries to support their forces not just with artillery and with tanks, also they're trying to implement a very powerful and very professional media campaign, trying to show the Ukrainians on the ground that it's better to surrender and not to continue fighting. That, of course, will reduce the difficulties for the Russians in this area to capture and to establish control over this territory. Now we're moving to the south, to the Siversk bridgehead. The Ukrainians continue surprising us during their operation. Let's say, I don't know what kind of operation is it, but the Ukrainians, to be more precise, the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, continue publishing the videos how they're bombing and shelling the Russian positions in the vicinity of Bilogorovka, in the vicinity of Berestova, and in the vicinity of all these settlements and the railroad ways. During the previous days, we discussed how the Ukrainians were bombing the Russian positions along railroad ways. I believe that the Russians were forced to step back because the geography of bombings and shellings and drone attacks have been removed from this area a little bit to the east. And this morning we discussed the video how the Ukrainians were implementing something like clearing operation during the night. They were discovering and tracking the Russian armored vehicles among the fields, and after that they were bombing them and with grenades from drones during the night just to make clearing operation. And today we got another video how the Ukrainians using drone destroyed the Russian truck, the Russian bus that were probably transferring the Russian troopers in the vicinity of Nagorno. So the Ukrainians continue bombing, and as we discussed, also the Ukrainians, to reinforce positions of 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, have redeployed the forces of 115th Mechanized Brigade, and based on the geography of Ukrainian attacks, I expect that these 115th Brigade will attack the Russian positions between the Yakovlevka and Berestova settlement along these fields in direction of trying to cut this force into parts, and after that the 150th Brigade will turn to Yakovlevka and will turn to Berestova. For now, the Ukrainians haven't started this operation for now, but if the Ukrainians and 10th Mountain Assault Brigade will continue showing us such results on this bridgehead, of course at some point the Ukrainians will have enough of power and some kind of superiority, and they will start their movements in this direction. For now, there is just let's say artillery and drone preparation of Russian territory. Now we're moving to Klishchiivka. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings, the Ukrainians were forced to step back. Some mappers have already updated their maps showing that the northern fortifications on Klishchiivka is in the gray zone. For now, I still keep that part of this stronghold is under Russian control, another part is under Ukrainian control. For now, this territory obviously is covered with the fog of war. The Ukrainians continue. The thing that I mentioned, that we stopped receiving any video or photo confirmations of clashes of storming operation from the Ukrainian, either from the Ukrainian side and from the Russian side. Basically, this situation can mean two things. The first one is that nobody attacks, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainian, and the second thing is nobody has normal progress and some results, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians. Neither the Ukrainians can show us any progress results, just the fields full of Ukrainian bodies. Neither the Russians can show or confirm us that they managed to repel the Ukrainians and to push them back. The only thing we have is that some geolocated videos from these points. For example, in this video we see how the Ukrainians bombed and attacked the Russian tanks, the Russian armored vehicles, and some ammo depots among the forest lines, and as a result of those attacks something detonated and was destroyed. Also, the Ukrainians shown us another video of tracking the Klishchiivka settlement at night, probably using the night vision equipment. They discovered few Russian positions, and after that they attacked those buildings with artillery systems. So just the videos showing us at least some geolocations and at least some situation on this bridgehead. For now, we can say for sure that southwestern part of Klishchiivka, this bridgehead, the area on the west of Avdiivka, still remains under Russian control, and that Ukrainians haven't provided us more evidence of control over any single trenches and strongholds in the vicinity of Klishchiivka. This is the only things that we can know for sure and that we can prove using the geolocated videos. Now we're moving to Avdiivka. The situation is very critical and very complicated on this bridgehead. The Ukrainians during the day made more than 15 attacks in this area, and most of them took place in direction of Krasnogorovka. The Ukrainians trying to attack this area until they have time, because now the Ukrainians still have time during the battle of South Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. Soon this time will be ended, and then and after that they won't be able to do any attacks, and then the Russians will counterattack. There is a very complicated situation in the vicinity of Severna, and one more time I'll remind you that according to the Russian sources, the Russians have established physical fire control over the road between Orlovka and Lastochkina, and this road is the main supply road that Ukrainians were using and are using to supply and support Avdiivka. We can say for sure that Ukrainians still use this road. Of course, they can still use it road. The only question we have is what kind of losses like the Ukrainians have during the usage of this road. And basically, the Ukrainians need to return control over Krasnogorovka if they want to stay on the safe side, if they want to be for 100% sure that there were going to be no encirclement and no cauldron in this Ukrainian stronghold. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 480 soldiers, including 8 armored vehicles and 6 armored vehicles and 5 artillery systems. Furthermore, the Ukrainians lost another Raider INTPQ-15 somewhere in this area. And finally, we are moving to the South Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia area, and after a very small operational pause that took place around a few days, the Ukrainians restart their offensive operation on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. During the previous days, the Ukrainians were accumulating their forces along the forest lines on the northern part of the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. They have completed this mission. They brought more soldiers, they brought fresh armored vehicles, artillery systems, and currently the Ukrainians have already launched the artillery duels with very high intensivity, and as a result of those artillery duels, the Ukrainians have already published us the new results of those attacks. The Ukrainians lost one Hyacinth in the vicinity of on Ugledar direction, so this is the Russian Hyacinth that was destroyed by the Ukrainian artillery system. As I understand, they were using maybe Excalibur for that purposes because the attack was very accurate. It wasn't HIMARS, but probably that was Excalibur. And another artillery system was destroyed on the south of Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The Ukrainians managed to discover and to track the Russian artillery system somewhere in the forest line and to destroy it. These two videos are geolocated and they're very fresh. These events took place maybe on the 12th of July, maybe even on the 30th. But we see the Ukrainian reactivation of their artillery duels, and today the military Russian expert, reported that Ukrainians launched 2 waves of attacks on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russian positions between this small river, a natural barrier, and Pryutina using the armored vehicles. That was the first direction of attack, and the second direction was between the Russians' defense belt. I will show you the Russian defense belt on this map. This is the Russian defense belt, and the Ukrainians were trying to attack between this defense belt and Staromayorsk, trying to split the Russian sector in 2 parts. And after that, some forces of that direction moved in direction of Staromayorsk, and the military expert blogger reported that the Ukrainians managed even to enter that settlement. And for example, today we got even some video confirmation. I'm not sure that this video shows exactly this settlement, but this video we got right exactly at the same time when the first reports that Ukrainians launched the attack and managed to enter the settlement appeared. So probably, I'm not sure for 100%, but probably this is the video of the Ukrainian attempt to enter Staromayorsk. This settlement, as you can see on this video one more time, one of the Ukrainian light vehicles got on the minefield and was destroyed. The second 2 light vehicles were forced to step back with the infantry on board. And furthermore, the Russians published more videos of how they were attacking and destroying the Ukrainian vehicles somewhere in Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Basically, in this video, we see that Ukrainians managed to accumulate another convoy of their armored vehicles along the forest line, and the Russians just basically moved their probably anti-tank squad that somewhere from the Russian side of forest line destroyed every single vehicle on that side. And there was also a picture of destroyed vehicles also somewhere in the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. So basically, as we discussed, the Ukrainians have relaunched this attack. We will During the next 24 hours, we are going to receive more video and more photo confirmations of the results of that clashes. But this is the strongest defense belt yet that Ukrainians were able to attack, because as you can see from one side there is a very big defense forest line, this one red one, and this defense line is protected from the western flank by the settlement Priutina and from the eastern flank by the settlement Staromayorska. So that means that there is a very short windows, not very big windows that Ukrainians can use for attack, and always very short windows for attack means at least artillery backs and basically and minefields. We haven't received any video confirmation from the western flank attack from this area, but I believe that the destiny of Ukrainian forces on this direction is almost the same of those light vehicles that managed to enter Staromayorska and that was destroyed on the minefields. Now we're moving to the Huliaipole area, and we got very interesting updates from this territory. The Russians made a small recon combat, and as a result of that recon combat they managed to maintain the gray zone. The Russians reported that as a result of fierce fightings they managed to capture these trenches, these fortifications that used to be in the gray zone and maybe under Ukrainian control. This piece of information we also got from the military expert Vremivka, and for now we can say that this is, I don't think that this real attack, as I told you, this is probably the maintaining of the gray zone before Ukrainian counterattack, because Huliaipole was the only bridgehead where the Ukrainians since the beginning of the greatest counter-offensive operation haven't made any attempt to attack Russian positions. And basically according to the new doctrine or the modern doctrine that we see that either the Russians and the Ukrainians use before the enemy's counterattack, if you have this information, this piece of information, you need to capture the gray zone, and it usually brings you a lot of benefits, because when the enemy attacks, at least you have 100, 200, 300, 500 meters of the territory that is under your control, but the forces behind you can prepare the defense belt and to repel the main enemy's attack. So this is something like this. The Russians also published the video how they were trying to bomb the some hangar in the vicinity of Malinovka. The thing is that sometimes, as I understand, the Russians attack the Ukrainian positions not because they know for sure that this is the positions of Ukrainian armored vehicles. Currently, they attack the buildings, the hangars and so on, because it may be a very suitable place for deployment of forces. Sometimes you don't need to have 100% intelligence information. Sometimes you just need to have logic and some video or photo confirmation from drones of movements of enemy's forces and so on. So basically, as you can see in Huliaipole, there are two updates. The Russians destroy probably some building with Ukrainians, and that they managed to maintain the gray zone and to capture the trenches in the gray zone, trying to make some difficulties for the Ukrainians probably before the upcoming counteroffensive operation. Now we're getting to the Bradley Square, to this territory. The Ukrainians, there were no active clashes in this area. We haven't received videos from this bridgehead. The only thing we have is that the Russians can probably this is the video of the clashes for the 11th and 12th of July, and the Russians are saying that on this video we see how the Russians attack the trenches of Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians from their side claimed that as a result of artillery duels they destroyed another Russian artillery system. As you can see, the explosion is very heavy, so probably that was not just artillery system but artillery system with ammo depot. So there's two videos. Basically the Ukrainians also continue counter artillery duels, trying to suppress the Russian forces and to prepare the main forces before the next wave of attack. Also, we got another video from the Ukrainian side showing that they were trying to bomb the Russian forces. It was the Russian reconnaissance team with anti-tank weapon that can, as you can see, easily move through the forest lines, and the Russians were trying to get to the north with one purpose: to mine the forest lines, to mine the road, and probably to attack some tanks, and after that to retreat. But that squad was discovered by the Ukrainian drones and was attacked by the Ukrainian artillery. The Russians continue bombing and shelling Orekhov. This is a very big city, and this city has a lot of infantry of Ukrainian forces inside of it. The Russians almost every single day make another attack, make another artillery wave of attacks, and today we got a video of 4 missile strikes on the south of Orekhov in the settlement by the name of Novoselivka. We haven't received videos, just the photo confirmations of 4 smoke areas, and the Russians were attacking the accumulation of Ukrainian forces, the Ukrainian tanks, the Ukrainian ammo depots, fuel depots, and those attacks were made using the missiles. And we got a lot of videos from Zhiribyanki. The Ukrainians today, during these days, they made a lot of attempts to attack, and for example, the previous waves the Ukrainians were trying to make along the road between Petsikhatki and Zhiribyanki. It is a very stupid tactic, because this road is under complete fire control, and not just under complete fire control. The thing is that the Russians have already established their artillery system somewhere behind, let's say, Zhiribyanki, in the vicinity of Grozova, maybe in Dolinka. The artillery systems that have one purpose: to attack this road. These artillery systems don't have any other purpose. And basically this is maybe D20 howitzers and D30 howitzers, the howitzers that you need to move with some kind of track. So you don't need to have team, you need just the forest lines. For example, this forest line, you need to bring artillery system somewhere in this forest line. You need to establish this artillery system to make few attacks against this road, to see that, to get some intelligence information and or drone information that artillery system are attacking this road perfectly. And after that, the Russians leave these D20 and D30 howitzers, and they move to, let's say, Grozova or Dolinka or to other point. And as soon as the Russian intelligence achieve information that Ukrainians launched their attack, the Russian artillery squad moves back to their artillery systems and just attacking at the same place. So basically, this is the reason, and this is the problem of Ukrainian plan of attack, because almost every single brush, every single tree, every single road, every single field, every single settlement is under complete Russian control, fire control, and not just control where you need to bring artillery system, trying to navigate your system. Everything is already navigated, everything is already calculated. The only thing you need is to give an order: start attack. So this is the reason currently the Ukrainians, if they want to continue advancing, they need first of all to suppress Russian artillery systems. And this is the reason of these storms, attacks from the Ukrainian side. As we discussed, basically the Ukrainians send their forces, there is a tank, but basically the Ukrainians try to use, of course, infantry for these purposes, of 71st Jaeger Brigade or other brigade. They're moving their forces, they're getting very close to the Russian positions, and after that they're turning back and started moving back. So I believe you saw this video of the Ukrainian attack. Basically, this is exactly the tactic. So the Ukrainians using infantry are moving forward, and at some point they're getting ordered to step back. For example, during that attack, I'm not even sure whether the Ukrainians have lost even a soldier of that attack, because, for example, when I was watching this video, I haven't seen even a single wounded Ukrainian soldier. So they started attack. As soon as the Russian artillery started attacking them, they got an order to step back, and basically they retreated. But they managed to accumulate and they managed to collect the necessary piece of information, not them, but probably the Ukrainian counter-artillery squads. And after that, the Ukrainians began the counter-artillery duels on this bridgehead. So this is the tactic. But this tactic, this video that we saw, there were no casualties among the Ukrainians. But usually during these attacks, the Ukrainians lose up to 30-40% of their platoon of their soldiers, of their team that are operating on this bridgehead. The Ukrainians also published the video how the Russian forces were moving along the forest line to the north, and that was another reconnaissance team with anti-tank weapon. The Russians also don't use armored vehicles. This video is geolocated, and the Russians were moving along this forest line to the north, trying to establish their positions, and of course to bomb, to attack, to target the Ukrainians who are operating on the Lapkova and Petsikhatki area. Anyway, this video we use for geolocation, and this show us like normal geolocation of Russian positions. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the South Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia area, the Ukrainians lost 180 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, and 8 artillery systems. So it's the heaviest losses of artillery systems from the Ukrainian side. So basically right now there is no offensive operation, because there is no sense to do any offensive operation until you are able to suppress enemy artillery systems. On Donetsk, the Russians destroyed 5 artillery systems. On the South Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia, 8. So as you can see, what is the main purpose and the main goal of both armies, at least these days. And when talking about Kherson area, the Russians reported that as a result of artillery duels and clashes among the islands, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers. It's a very big level of losses, and currently there are very fierce fightings for the islands in Dnipro River, but we haven't received many updates, video, photo confirmations at all. The only area we got some confirmations is the bridge, but currently the Russians left that territory, and this territory is under Ukrainian control. The Russians published very interesting video from, let's say, Zaporizhzhia region. It was the strike of Lancet, and the Russians are saying, this video is geolocated, that Lancet destroyed another Ukrainian raider. And the interesting part of this video is that this raider is located very deep on side of Ukrainian territory. So basically, if the Russians were using the area somewhere in the vicinity of Energodar, the distance from this settlement to the Ukrainian position is around, as you can see, 60 kilometers. So that means that the Russians do have weapon or have equipment that allow their drones, to be more precise, their Lancet, to get deep inside the Russian-Ukrainian defense territory, the Ukrainian sector, for around 60 kilometers. It's a very big problem for the Ukrainians, to tell the truth. One more thing to discuss one more time. As you know, today the head of 58th Army was dismissed. According to official position, he is the head of Russian army who protect Zaporizhzhia and South Donetsk area. Also today we got some updates from mainland, from Russia, a lot of very interesting updates. Today the Russians reported that they complete the production of another series of Su-35 aircrafts, the most modern model. Like the entire squad of these airplanes was deployed to Russian army. So basically that means that we will expect some kind of intensifying of Russian airstrikes with most modern planes, Su-35S model with guided bombs. As you can see, this is the second series of Su-35 that was created by the Russian military industry. And also we got another video how the Wagners were transferred from Moscow in direction of Belarus on the trucks and buses with the Belarusian signs. So basically we see that the Russians started the real redeployment process of the forces from Moscow in direction of Belarus, of real army. For now, we don't know the purpose of these events, but this is the stormtroopers, this is the storm squad, this is not the guarders of border, this is the real fighters. And of course, the only reason to redeploy the fighting troopers on the territory, on this or that territory, only if you are planning to use them on purpose. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.